49% of Gen Z respondents said that they would quit a job inside 2 years if it didn't align with their goals and their values on social and environmental values.
Forget us and them. Everyone's a human being and everyone has a hierarchy of needs, and communication is the answer.
Running a busy practice or team or whatever, but you've got no secretarial support because after all we've got all this technology to help us.
Energetic culture of a space has a lot to do with whether people desire to contribute more within that space.
How we communicate to our teams, how they communicate externally and internally, is incredibly important, and that's part of the training for leadership.
So welcome back to Lead Forward, the podcast where we explore what it really takes to shape leaders of tomorrow. So I'm joined again by two absolute powerhouses in leadership development. So David Roylance, who's founder of Speak to Shine, is known for helping entrepreneurs and experts transform their communication so that they can scale their impact, confidence, their incomes. And many of his clients jump from 100,000 or to 150,000 or 200,000 simply by learning to lead and sell with greater presence and confidence. And alongside him is Sandi Goddard, co-founder of Goddard Delaney, with over 35 years advising ambitious SMEs and FTSE listed companies. So she specializes in aligning leadership strategy and messaging and helping organizations just strengthen their profile and scale with purpose, and even preparing for high value exits. Individually, they're experts. Together, they offer complementary skills that organizations need to build the next generation of leaders, combining strategic leadership with executive communication and presence. So today in episode 2, which is leading Gen Z, motivating, retaining and preparing the next generation of leaders, we're going to tackle some of the most urgent leadership challenges, how to unlock the potential of Gen Z, not as a crisis, but as the opportunity to future-proof leadership itself. So Sandi, David, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's dive in. Where do we start? I suppose, where is the opportunity?
Yeah, and also, why do people think that it's a crisis? Because there comes a generation who might articulate things a little differently in terms of what it is that they want and care about. Every challenge, if you're an entrepreneur, you get used to every challenge is an opportunity. Everything that goes wrong is an opportunity to find out something new and start better. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback, as Tony Robbins and several others have taught me over the past 15 years. So how come people think of it as a crisis? How come people... And I've had many conversations with firms who've used me and have been keen to use me, where they've thought of this as a crisis, and it means that they automatically switch into us and them thinking.
Well, perhaps they think of it as a crisis because Gen Z is more articulate about the way they want to work. They look at the generations before them and think, I don't want to work like that. That's not to say every single person in this generational group feels like that, but enough do that people notice. So whereas in the past we probably, David and I both have lawyer clients and know lots of lawyers, and in the legal profession, one of my friends recently said to me, it's probably a good thing that they put their foot down and don't want to work the sort of hours I worked. I wish I'd been more articulate about it, because we tend to follow what the norm is. But there's been a break. That 2-year break with COVID has probably helped to emphasize the difference in generational thinking. So
there's a generational shift anyhow. I think, like my generation upwards, maybe 30 and upwards, maybe 35 and upwards. I don't know where that line or that cutoff is. But but there definitely was a period of time where people, were told to work hard and to go to work, and almost like kind of factory hens, or maybe that's not the right word, but and so that's comfortable, and that's what people do as the norm, and that's subconsciously, and you go, and working hard was seen as a badge of honor. I work hard, I work long hours.
Also that presence, that pretending to be, what's it called? Pretending to be at your desk, leaving your coat over your chair, or your phone, not necessarily your phone, but something by your computer, so people thought you were still in the room. So that you're seen to be working late, you were seen to be there, which is such a waste of time and life and opportunity and
There's a
energy.
shift that's changed, hasn't it? There's definitely a shift in vibe.
Yeah. So there are still those who want to spend those hours because they see them as an opportunity to grow in the company. But that, I think, is more because they are actually going out networking, or they're actually completing projects, or they're doing extracurricular. I know in a credit card company, I know a couple of senior people there, and I know some of the junior executives do extracurricular projects in order to be noticed, because there's a value to your CV in doing that sort of work. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, as an entrepreneur, I've always been taught, and I teach this to my clients as well, you need to work smarter, not harder. That, when after the 2009 to 2011 crash, and I was working with the Royal Bank of Scotland with their Treasury Department, and they fired me and then rehired me 3 months later, only to tell me that the reason they fired me was they didn't want to waste me and all the people they were going to get rid of. And I asked them about their reasoning for the choices they made. And then they said, we looked for everyone with their heads down and we fired them. So kind of being at your desk is no definer of being perceived as being valuable. They want people to be visible and people to demonstrate their value. It's a different.
And I think that's where doing these, it's not always possible in smaller businesses, though I'm sure it can be possible. But as a rule, the large businesses, the corporates, have projects that people can do as in a voluntary capacity.
Yeah.
And doing those projects raises a profile amongst the leaders, rather than being present at your desk but not really doing anything. And also networking. You and I both know a lawyer who has said there's somebody within his team who is prepared to do the networking outside of the 9 to 5. And he's bringing in business as a consequence. And you notice people like that because they are using their initiative and they've got drive, And so it is a fine balance between being taken for granted and expected to work from 8 till 7 or whatever, and working 9 to 5, but then putting in the effort in certain areas.
Do you think that it comes into account the value and the recognition and the rewarding as part of that? And maybe there's something that needs to happen there, because I mean, it is really important. I think back to some of the bigger opportunities over my career, and sometimes going the extra mile is a saying, or just doing that little bit more, and sometimes an evening meal, or even just yesterday on a Sunday evening, I did an 8 o'clock meeting with someone in California. Sometimes going the extra mile, and you have that gut feeling, and so we're okay to do that. But maybe those Gen Z that feel they don't want to do that, if we could find ways to make them rewarded, or how do we buy them into that?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, I think that the sort of thing I've been speaking about is probably more self-rewarding, because if you're doing that, doing those extra things, you are actually improving your CV. and raising your own profile in order to move on, either within a company or into another company. There are well, quite a few firms offer a form of profit share, don't they? And that's another way of being rewarded. I think can be an easy ride for some people, though, can't it? They sit on the backs or the coattails of those who are really working hard and adding to the, productivity.
Interesting.
I think the culture and the energetic culture of a space has a lot to do with whether people desire to contribute or desire to contribute more within that space. The energetic culture set by, people and architecture, actually, and how people engage with each other, and whether people feel listened to, and which for me is the crux of the definition of the difference between crisis and opportunity.
I hear quite a lot the phrase in various different ways of, if you look after your staff, then your staff will look after your customers, clients, whatever you call your
well, that's Richard Branson, isn't it? That's where he's
is it indeed
voluble.
There you go.
Yeah, he says you look after your staff, they're much more important than your customers.
And also train your staff well enough that they could leave, but treat them well enough that they will always want to stay. And I find that one really valuable, because that's about culture.
I think if we think about how much it costs to recruit and retain staff, probably, I haven't actually done the sums, but it would be interesting to see if it's actually more than recruiting and retaining clients. I don't know.
I think everyone would be surprised if we did have the data on that, and I wish we had it.
It would be interesting. I'd like to see that. I do think there's no point in paying lip service to treating your staff well and being fair with your staff and listening to your staff, because at the end of the day, if they are unhappy, they won't work well, and those who are good will leave anyway. So if you're a company that's genuinely listening to your staff and taking on board what they have to say and actually actioning it where applicable, then you're going to be respected and you're going to have the loyalty. That's actually, in a nutshell, what Gen Z is looking for. Gen Z is looking for
transparency. I've written down here: transparency, communication, and loyalty.
Yeah.
A sense of belonging.
Yes.
Should be easy, right?
It's not.
Well, I was reading this morning about how companies are making big gestures, and big gestures go nowhere because they're not about listening on an everyday basis. They're not about
it's also a lot of good companies out there genuinely believe in this and want to do this. But of course, something that I got, I did a video recently and I got a message back saying, yes, but how do you do that on a day-to-day basis when everything's hitting the fan? But every day is a crisis in some businesses. Every day requires a lot of attention from the owners or the directors. And they sometimes overlook the minutiae of talking to their staff. Really good leaders try and talk to the staff on a very regular basis, whether that's daily or weekly, but regularly, so that they are in touch with what's going on. And we all know from body language and the way people talk, the way the work's done, whether they're happy or not.
Yeah.
And
I think as well, they want to be seen as individuals, not cogs in the bigger picture, I think. So that feeds into that, Sandi, where the more you touch, the more touch points you have, and you find that even though it's hitting the fan every day, is incredibly important. Is
Yeah,
that fair?
yeah. The
Well, yeah.
royals, I've never been privileged to to shaken hands with a royal, but I am told that people love it because when the Queen or now King Charles walk down a line, they have something to say to each person. And that means that whoever is reporting to them has researched all the guests. So
Mm.
if there's a line of people, they will know one tiny piece about each person. And that makes you feel good.
Mm.
This really important person has just said hello to me and picked up on something about me. So that must be easy in a company, wouldn't you think, where you see your staff every day to be able to do something small like that.
It's funny, isn't it, as well, that because when you talk about law firms, for example, take that as there are this applies to all of the a lot of sectors, but you take that law firm sector, and there's going to be a lot of rainmakers there, um, but they're going to live by the value that people work with people, and so how you make someone feel has a direct correlation to the revenue that you make within your company. How you make people feel is really important, in my opinion, in sales. But that's the same thing. It's just reverse engineering. They value that because they can see the direct return on investment. And when you start trying to put the same emphasis and uh, priority onto managing your next leadership, or the next generation of leaders, it's just surely about applying the same value and how you make people feel.
Well, it's understanding, all those rainmakers will understand that their ability to make a personal and individual connection and build rapport is directly associated with bringing money in, but it's directly associated with so much more. I tend to think that almost every conversation we get into is a form of sale. It's just very few of those sales involve money. Like almost every conversation that a couple have is in some way a sale. What should we eat tonight? Is a sale. Shall we get married? Is a sale. Shall we live
Oh,
together? Is a sale.
So
And
those are big things.
negotiations, constant negotiation.
constant negotiation. So, and in the same way, when I'm working with employees and they say, "Oh, I don't do sales," or even work with entrepreneurs who go, "I don't do sales." Well, actually, you do all the time. You're not aware that actually you're significantly more gifted than you believe you are. But certain conversations, you suddenly lose that ability to connect with individuals. Now, the rainmakers can do it easily because they've had years of experience. The lunches and the football matches and everything else that they have been to and networked. Even trying to help someone get something else that's not about selling directly is a form of sale. Oh, you've got a bad back. You should meet my chiropractor. Really? Why? It's a sale.
Well, that's sort of leading us on to um, engagement and communication.
Yes.
It's incredibly important, actually. But I think it starts with the person who picks up the phone in a company. So, whoever answers the phone should already be selling the business,
Absolutely.
ethos of the business, whatever it is. And if you get someone who doesn't speak the language very well and who sounds moody and grumpy, it puts whoever's on the phone, puts them off. You can have people who don't have a very good command of English who sound wonderful, and they will say, "Let me help you. Let me see what I can do. I'll find somebody." You don't have to speak the language as long as you communicate well. And that, I think, is important all the way through the company, how we communicate to our teams, how they communicate externally and internally. It's incredibly important. And that's part of the training for leadership. So In that,
Yeah.
I know I come from that background, but for me, how you present yourself, how you
Well,
communicate is
how
incredible.
you do something is how you do everything, and the 1%, that you can improve across the business. And if you really valued that and you really looked for them and then you could find them. I found something recently that Stephen Bartlett had said. He was on a stage, and there must have been five, well, however many thousands of people. He's Stephen Bartlett. He's on a stage, he's presenting, and he says to the audience, before I start every podcast, I have someone from my team who checks the CO2 in the air. And the whole audience giggled and laughed
Oh,
as
there's
if
more
it was
oxygen. Yeah.
ridiculous. And he said, well, that's because everything we do is to do with the small 1%. And he said, and I noticed you as an audience all laughed. He said, but let me tell you that there's a direct scientific correlation between the amount of oxygen in the air and the cognitive, brain functionality of
More scary,
myself
more
and my
sleepy.
guests.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. So in order to improve his podcast, he puts that as a factor. And another thing that I really liked was even down to the really small, finite details. He's Stephen Bartlett. The guests are coming on. They get some value. They know why they're going there. He doesn't need to do anything extra. But what he does do is, on every podcast now, before they leave, they get a kind of "This Is Your Life" book of what they discussed in the podcast, produced whilst the podcast is running, and when they leave it. Those are the kind of that how you make someone feel when you give them that book
Yeah.
is going to be incredible, right?
Yeah, really valued.
So it's transforming that to how you make how you do everything in your business, but also maybe how you make your staff feel. What are the 1%?
Yes. What can you give them first?
Yeah.
But
Mm,
without necessarily thinking about what can I get back. And that's the irony of it. The moment you gift with a view to get something back, the gift is inauthentic, and people can smell that inauthenticity that you have to give first willingly without thinking about what you get back. But you get back so much more when you gift with that energy in your mind and in your body.
A couple of years ago, a client of mine wanted to do an exercise on values and ethos. They wanted to understand from the bottom up what the values and ethos was of the people who worked with them, so they could actually apply them as the whole company's values. And it was interesting because nearly everybody responded. One person didn't, and it could be because they did have an opportunity to either speak or write, but this particular person decided not to. And I think there was maybe one or two people who said, well, these are a waste of time. Nobody ever, these questionnaires don't work. We fill them in, no one takes any notice. But actually, this company genuinely wanted to know. And once we got the results, they then fed them back to the team saying, right, these are the company's values. This is what you value, therefore, this is what we value.
mm,
But it's interesting how some people become jaded. They don't, because maybe firms they've worked for in the past have done all these exercises and paid lip service. So you become a bit jaded and you don't believe they're going to happen. That's a shame,
Yeah.
because that's about leadership. If you don't going to do this exercise, then apply it. Stand by the decision. Work with it. You know.
And values is incredibly important in this whole discussion to this particular group of people. I saw something in a Deloitte global millennial and Gen Z survey. 49% of Gen Z respondents said that they would quit a job inside 2 years if it didn't align with their goals and their values on social and environmental values.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I don't think that has happened. That's never been mentioned. I've never heard anyone mention that in my career.
Yeah, but this
Incredible.
generation is different, and I think a lot of that has to do with um, immigration, with global warming, all of these things, which perhaps a few generations ago, other issues were important. And certainly in the generation that I grew up in, the Cold War was an issue, and bombs, potentially, mass weapons of mass destruction were an issue. And that's come around again, actually. But it's primarily, I think it's things like the environment and sustainability, having a clarity of manufacturing channels, understanding where your goods come from. All of that is important to this for a large number of people in this generation we're talking about. Not everybody, but mostly.
And perhaps how businesses, portray that message outwardly.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't as much as they should, and maybe the investment into that. But you could argue, I suppose, if they did, and that messaging around corporate social responsibility and values and things like that, if you tied that to recruitment and retention, maybe there's an argument that that's part of the making sure you present your values and the messaging.
Be honest, because this generation, they are not stupid. They have been open to social media and messaging, online messaging, and all the rest of it all their lives. They are not stupid, and they understand when someone is greenwashing. And funnily enough, I heard that last week when I was talking to someone about a career path, his progression and so forth. We were talking about sustainability, and he said, you'd be surprised how many companies I've looked at that are simply greenwashing. Now, this is someone who has got great organizational skills. He's 30. He's got great management ability, and he's highly communicative. He's a great communicator and highly engaging. So potentially someone you'd want to employ.
And the statistics here in the same Deloitte survey, 60% of Gen Z and millennial actually thrown into that. So 49% of the workforce, 60% of those said that they would research companies on their stance on those values before joining.
So they clearly do. Yeah. I know I'm saying it for one individual, but he's representative of his generation. So, yeah, it's
interesting. And especially when you factor in kind of LinkedIn's just made a play recently in their job tab where they will show candidates, that how active employers are around job applications and some of those stats. So you factor that in, there's really nowhere to hide for businesses that's probably a topic that needs to be frontline and center, and actually how they promote that is going to be really important.
It is, because if they want the best leaders going forward, and we're talking about succession planning, then they have to be squeaky clean,
Yeah.
So, and
I mean, look what happens to people who put their head above the parapet and visibility. And if you think about what's any kind of celebrity who signs up for anything like Strictly in the UK, suddenly everyone's digging into every little piece about them. We're used to doing that now, not just the press, but as ordinary people, like you say, that researching companies on LinkedIn and other places on their stances on things before you consider whether you would work with them.
We're all mini journalists. We've all got the access to the data and the information too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a colleague and good friend, Anna Brees, who left BBC and ITV, where she was both news presenter and news producer, to start becoming a guru of social media and new media. And she's got this incredibly successful local news channel in Wales called Penarth TV. But what she's doing is putting onto TikTok and Instagram the news that people actually want to see and hear, which is not the same as the news that's on the BBC, on ITV, on Sky. So, she's getting thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of hits from lots of people locally who are interested in hearing some good news about things going well, as well as everything else that they're getting news on. So that I think there's nowhere to hide, because anybody can pick one of these up and you can record something, and the next thing you know, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on LinkedIn.
I think it's important. I think it's extremely important these days for that to be the norm, for this research to be done, because if you look at the kind of examples of leadership that we've got in the world at the moment, it's going more and more anti-democratic, more and more controlling of the judiciary, of the press, it even commerce. I mean, I'm thinking obviously of Donald Trump and the way he's pushing people to sack employees, managers that he doesn't like, or get rid of judges he doesn't like, simply because they're saying things that he doesn't agree with.
Talk show hosts he doesn't like.
Indeed. So he's getting involved at every level, or if it's not him, it's his associates supporting him and getting rid of people who speak against him or speak contrary to what he has to say. And that to me is a frightening form of leadership, and it's not one that you would want to encourage. And I'm hoping that we're talking about a generation that actually abhors that sort of thing and is actually going to work against it, because we want an honest, fair, democratic world. I do anyway. I think most of us do. Some control, like maybe a nanny state could be good, but I'm not sure I'd want one.
And at the end of the day, that change is it can only be a good thing, but actually it's a necessary thing. It's coming. You know, Gen Z are going to be the leaders of
they will lead
tomorrow.
You are right, Dean.
So there's nowhere to hide with that. You know, that influx of people is only, there's more and more of them. Let's put them that way. I don't know what the next one is. Maybe it's Gen Y next.
Let's encourage them.
The thing is, things will change as well. There'll be other issues that follow for the next generation and the generation after that. After all, we're all different people in almost every decade of our lives. I certainly in my 20s wasn't thinking about having a family and owning a house. And I have very different priorities in this decade of life than I did 20 years ago. And about how, and also I think that's going to be natural for Generation Z as well. However, they're here with their values right now, and they're operating in a world with the rest of us where we want them to help themselves and help a firm grow.
It's funny, you know, in terms of, I think when I was growing up, I grew up in a world where it was, and I think there was a Boyzone song that said this exact thing, you know, find a girl, settle down. If you want, you can get married, and then own a house, buy a car, and then that's life, you know. And as long as you've got food on the table, then you can have a lovely life. You can be happy. All about family led, and so those were my values starting out. Now, you know, I've had a very windy road, and it's gone in a different direction. It started with that, but then it's gone very different. But I think sometimes when I think of Gen Z, and I follow a lot of Gary V content, and he talks about the youth of today. All of them have kind of parents who are more mollycoddly than they might have been in years gone by.
Yeah. Yes, you're right, because that would be, so my generation, the culture was, so in our, so the culture was sex, drugs and rock and roll. That wasn't something that every one of us followed, but we were much more laissez-faire in the way we brought our families up. And then I look at my daughter and my sons, and they have been much more, yes, they've put blankets around their children a little bit and kept them safe. But it hasn't stopped the way they've tackled life. My children and my grandchildren have all got the same approach to life. They still want to do well in their own particular way.
Well,
So
his argument, I think the Gary Vee argument is this, that, it's kind of, if parents are trying to be kind, they're trying to be kinder. And he's saying, when I was younger, it was get a job and start contributing. And by the way, you need to pay rent by the time you're 16. He was kind of, he feels it was harsher. And now it's there's more support. But what he's saying to parents in his message, and I find that really interesting because, it would be this age group, this Gen Z age group. What he's saying is that actually they're not doing any justice to their children. What they want them is to actually have responsibilities to hit the ground. I mean, I suppose it's probably a sidetrack from this conversation because we're actually talking about people who have got careers, who are in there. Yes. So maybe it's not the same thing, but I find it fascinating how those different generations.
It is the same thing because it sounds as if they're not helping their children to stand on their own 2 feet. But I'm looking at my daughter and sons who treated their children in the way you're discussing now, given them a lot of support, loads of support. But their children have still gone on to, bar one, they've still gone on to careers and progressed and gone their own way.
Maybe it's all relative. Maybe it plays out in the numbers and it's actually not a thing.
So
I think there's a balance.
I think it's quite nice to have parents that are prepared to and are able to as well, because we've got to add that in there. But even if you haven't got the actual financial background, you can still support your children by allowing them to come home and live at home and all the other things. But and I think it's nice that you can do that. I think also most of us are going to want to get out there and prove ourselves at some stage and live on, stand on our own 2 feet.
Definitely.
Maybe it takes longer today. I don't know. Sorry, David, I cut you up.
I think that there's a balance where as parents you can protect too much. And I don't mean that in any way as an accusation, Sandi, but I think
when my oldest son came back from uni and we said, well, when you get a job you'll have to pay rent, he left home and moved to Brighton. Still paid rent.
Yeah. Well, my daughter got her first job at 13 and my son his first job at 16, and they have independently had their own money and go out and buy their own clothes and what have you. Great, thank God for that, because there's so much more I am paying for. But I think there's a balance between that, right, contribute and that sort of putting so many blankets around them that they don't get to see what the world is actually like.
I mean, that's the toughest job in the world anyway, isn't it? Parenting, toughest job. And in hindsight, nobody gets it 100% right, no matter how much your values and passion at the start. So
don't have an opportunity to practice, do we?
Well, yeah, you do the best job you know how to do. So I just want to touch back on then. So we know that why people need to take this seriously in business and why they might want to invest in their messaging around their core values and trying to help Gen Z to feel some sense of belonging, because the stats clearly say that that's really important. Can we take the conversation back to an interesting area? Because I just had a thought and I want to throw it out there and maybe we could just discuss it briefly, which is around that sales area, because it has been said that Gen Z don't want to pick up the phone and maybe not keen to network out of hours. Some of those sales things that in those sales departments and roles where it's incredibly important to have that. But I'm just thinking, are we looking at square pegs and judging new people and new generations with old school when we think that these Gen Z are probably the only generation that have grown up with social media and have grown up with AI tools? And I just wonder, are we trying to get them to sell in a way like that's not natural, a square peg in a round hole? Maybe there's new ways, and maybe we should. Maybe
Well,
there's
yeah.
embracing that.
Well, I mean, there are going to be many that are just not used to using a phone as a phone to start off with. So the idea of picking up the phone, whether it's a sales call or not, is going to be alien, because we've got WhatsApp, we've got or Zoom.
They probably don't even pick up the phone to each other.
No, they don't. Like I'm constantly saying to my family, just pick up the phone. They're like, oh, I've sent a WhatsApp and they haven't replied me for the past 2 hours. Pick up the phone and give them a call. Oh, what?
We used to go and knock on their door.
Yes. So so the medium might be the challenge there, that because those of us, hello, I've been able to use the phone since I'm very young, and landline, and then having my own mobile. But I wonder if the ability to listen to tonality of voice and being able to assimilate, work out what it is that's going on with people when there's no visual is a little bit more difficult. Having said that, they then read text and assimilate what text. and my thing, I used to do an exercise with a digital design agency that I used to work with, and I said, I'd like you all to write an email to a client, or to pick an email that you've written to a client, and print it out on a piece of paper, and we'd get everyone together. There was about 20 of them in the room, and I'd take all of these pieces of paper and give them to someone else, and I'd have somebody else read out the email, someone who hadn't written that email. And every single person stood up and went, that's not what I meant, when they heard someone else's voice.
And that's why being able to speak on the phone is so important.
Exactly.
Because you lose the meaning sometimes in the emails, especially if there's a stream. And I've just had it with a client complaining about someone who doesn't want emails because he thinks it's important to talk. Well, yes, it is important to talk. But if you don't answer the phone, if you're not in the office every day, and if you're missing each other, then sometimes emails are important. And emails are really important in terms of a paper trail. So I'm not knocking emails at all, because, you need, if you're sending out a verification about something, then it's better to have it in writing. But you do lose the meaning in texts and WhatsApps and emails. You don't always hear the tone of voice. So
Yes.
if I read something that you've sent me and I read it incorrectly, I think you're being judgmental, rude, angry.
And that happens an awful lot.
Yeah. May I tell a story about a friend of mine I used to do double act work with when I was subcontracting for another firm. And his name is Martin. And Martin, lovely trainer, worked with him very, very well. He had a client on his own, and he was training that person's staff like fortnightly. And at the end of every day, he would write like a 15-page email. If you printed it out, it would be 15 A4 pieces of paper, delineating in the finest detail everything that every person got on the course. And he did this every night he worked for this client, did it without fail, spent something like an hour and a half writing to this one client with all this information. And this went on for about 3 months, and she never replied. This client never replied until this one time when Martin got a reply. 3 words: I don't scroll.
I didn't scroll yesterday, I'm afraid, and I only saw the second page of your email this morning.
Isn't that fascinating? And so you wouldn't know that unless they communicate it.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, when I tell that story, some people go, "Oh, how rude, how rude." But actually, all she was trying to do was say,
Shorten it.
please don't bother.
Yeah.
I
thought you were
sympathize.
going
I
to say,
feel
"I
like
don't
I've had
care."
I feel like I've had a couple of those emails. It was always said of me, it's too long. It's always too long. Everything's too long. Your sales notes, your emails, your calls, everything's too long. It's, things are a bit sharper these days. I say,
Yeah,
hi,
but that's
you want it, bye.
I was going to say that, but then you see, if it's longer, at least there's information in there that helps you to understand the tone of voice. If it's short, you
Yeah.
miss the tone of voice.
Well,
So
the thing that I used to do the thinking was when I used to write things, because I was unconfident, I would think of, oh, they could have an objection to that. So I'd cover it off and then I'd write something else and I think they could have an. And before you know it, you've written an essay that they're never going to read because the subconscious mind goes, boring.
I don't
It's
think it's quicker sometimes to pick up the phone. You know,
if
you
you were
send
talking to
messages
them,
back.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Very
And
true.
I think it's fascinating because I used to be one of those people who went, "Oh, I don't do sales," and I had it in my head that sales was a dirty word and sales was about manipulation. And I think a lot of Generation Z have got that idea into their heads that I don't want to be involved in that sort of murky world of sales. And when I learned to reframe in my mind the idea of sales being the discovery of a match. Are you a match? Are they a match? Are you a match for them? Are they a match for you? Then the way that you begin and then proceed with the conversation changes dramatically. So, for instance, Dean, with your, if you were in a sales conversation or you were in any kind of conversation where you have concerns about somebody's potential objections, you'd be able to, by virtue of seeing them or by virtue of seeing and hearing or even just on the phone hearing, you'd be able to pick up when it would be appropriate to take those objections before they're actually articulated, because you'd be being flexible in terms of what you're getting from someone else. You know, I always say at the beginning of any conversation about buying something, are you okay if what we do now is talk about whether we're a match and we have a conversation that's about working that out? And if
Or some of the other difficult things, budget.
yeah,
Much easier done in front of the person, right?
yes,
You wonder sometimes, you send the email and then no reply and you wonder what
Yeah.
happens, but you've got no idea.
And also, it's not just the tone, is it? It's the pauses. When someone stops talking and you think, okay, they're either thinking now or I have actually overstepped the mark, or we're able to make judgment around pauses as well. When someone, and also it's sometimes I don't know, that when the tone of voice changes, whether they laugh, none of that comes across in an email.
I think it's taking the time to care, isn't it? But that very thing kind of leads all the way back into, this, how do you manage Gen Z and how do you lead Gen Z?
Exactly.
Well, take the time to care, to understand. It's that you treat them like a customer.
Yeah.
And they feel it. And then
but if you're in the us and them zone, everything is going to be a problem. And the decision you've made to make it us and them means that everything you see and everything you hear will confirm the bias that says these are a different creature and we have nothing in common and therefore they are just a problem.
And right now, let me give you this stat from a Gallup survey.
Yes.
Right now, and I think there was 10,000 Gen Zs surveyed. 30% of Gen Z felt engaged at work.
70% didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big number, isn't it? So there's a lot of work to do there. I want to just throw some things at you. So I wrote down lots of things, and I think things that businesses need to work on. So I want to just kind of list them and state the issue, and then a couple of minutes on each of them, just so we can make sure we cover the things that people need to do. And if they went
Yes.
away and prioritized those, they could actually get some
Yes.
actionable results.
Good.
So, first of all, purpose and value alignment. So they want to feel connected to something bigger. How do we do that?
Well, I think we've talked about identifying what their values are and then employing them ourselves within our businesses to ensure that we are aligned. But you can't do that unless you know what they are. You have to find out.
And so it comes to that talking, doesn't it? You know, that
Mhm.
asking questions. Maybe that's the start point, discovery.
Yeah, and engagement in long-term outcomes, you know. Where do
Sandy,
you want to be?
before we started this call, you told me a story actually of your daughter's business, which is on that very point, I think, isn't it?
Yes, so this business is undergoing well, they're going through change as companies always do. And instead of just making a plan and putting it to everyone, they actually engaged with the managers and discussed it with them. The managers gave them feedback and actually ideas that they hadn't considered, which helped them to do and to put together an even better plan.
Which
So,
made them feel good.
of course, the managers are thrilled that they were asked and also that their ideas were implemented and they feel engaged. They feel important that it's part of their job anyway. So, of course you should talk to your management team and find out what they think and ensure that you're taking the business in the right way. And
I think sometimes it's just so busy and it's hitting the fan all the time, as we say. So it's easy to just, oh, well, that's just a step we don't need. And I think maybe that's what's happening.
I don't know. A lot of companies have managed, well, most companies that I work with have regular management meetings. So the question is, what are you doing in those management meetings if you're not actually talking to and listening to your managers? Are you just passing directives down and taking reports back and nothing sort of, no
Sure.
fertilization? It
So,
It's tricky when you're in the middle. I work with an investment firm with a group of EA managers who were stuck in a very difficult position because the EAs were complaining to them. Management are like this, management are like that. Why aren't we getting this? Why do we have to take on extra work when someone leaves? Why can't we recruit? And they're absorbing all of this from below them, and then they go to their managers upstairs, and their management are just going, just deal with it. I don't care. Just deal with it.
And we've just had that in a conversation David and I had earlier. One of our guests pointed out that she's working with a senior leader who is just adamant that certain jobs have got to be done by a certain time. And when the feedback is we can't do those jobs within a 4-week period, they're going to need 3 weeks to achieve the result. Sorry, 3 months to achieve the result. The response has been, no, you've got 4 weeks. And so the manager isn't being listened to, despite her many years of expertise, the fact that she's been employed because she's an expert in her field. She knows what she's talking about, but she's not being listened to. So
that's difficult, isn't it? That's challenging. That's where burnout lies in the end, doesn't it?
Yes.
When you're in that middle seat.
So, what kind of leader is she working with?
Well, let me give you the next headline. So, flexibility and well-being. So, hybrid, flexible hours, clear boundaries, mental health.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of firms are taking mental health very seriously. A lot of firms are offering private health care and complementary access to mental health practitioners within the premises.
Yeah. And also, of course, a lot of firms are ensuring they've got people who are trained in recognizing mental health issues not delivering on them because, of course, they're not clinicians, but being able to recognize when someone's suffering a mental health problem and being able to flag that up to the relevant people.
And I would imagine that that's a lot more prominent in this particular demographic of people because of the exposure from a very young age to phones and now, AI. I may be wrong. I don't have any evidence to back that up, but I would say that it must be challenging to grow up in that environment where there is no release.
Must be quite comfortable too to have an acceptance that mental health is as important as physical health and to be prepared to go to therapy. And I didn't realize how commonplace this has become amongst the 30-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
I found out last week that actually it's becoming increasingly common. So you've got a generation growing up that accepts there's nothing wrong with going to therapy, gives you an opportunity to talk to some about issues that is not friends or family.
Yeah, and it's the same as, trying to work on your physical health, to work on that mental health and that prowess. Does that even factor in then? Are businesses thinking about, meditation and
Yes.
things? They are.
There's a lot of there are a lot of employee assistance programs out there that provide all sorts of apps for employees. And then as you go up the
Yeah.
ladder, as it were, you've got the elite performers, particularly in global corporates, being offered mental health support. So clinicians, coaches, people they can work with to help them. I mean, if you think about those who are earning huge sums and who are under pressure from their firm as well as their family to maintain those earnings, that's where burnout, I think that's really where burnout.
And I think that could become quite a, almost like a pandemic kind of area when you factor in that people are now able to use AI to move 5, 10 times faster. And so that, how do you compete if you're then expected to raise that level or that bar a little more? Or maybe that makes it easier. I don't know.
And it can do, I suppose, in some ways. I mean, I know of a number of firms where they're removing the personal assistants from their directors and their senior associates. You're running a busy practice or team or whatever, but you've got no secretarial support because after all, we've got all this technology to help us. But actually, you still have to stop and spend time dealing with the technology. You still have to book your flights, sort out your calendar,
Yep.
book your notes. And it doesn't matter if you've got granola or whatever you've got to cover your notes. You've still got to read them, check them, make sure they're correct. So taking away that support is just adding more pressure. The technology doesn't actually take away from the pressure. So
What about growth and speed of advancement as one of the things that I researched or my team researched? So suggestions that they want visible, fast-tracked growth, skill building, and learning, or they're liable to jump.
Yes.
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. David, you do, obviously. Yeah.
Yes, they do, and confidence is a huge ask. You know, they if people are asked to write what is the growth that they most want, it's their confidence.
Well, you've got to ask them again, haven't you?
Yeah.
What do they want?
Yeah.
But if you think about it, in manufacturing, you naturally assume that people need to know how to use machinery or deal with new textiles or whatever the product range is that you work with. And you naturally expect your teams to learn about the latest in those areas. And when I was running my agencies, I expected my team to want to learn about the new apps software that was coming on board. So it helped their jobs, So why should it be any different now? Why should we? Of course, we should be giving our teams the opportunity to do management training or whatever the skill sets are that help them to be better at what they do.
It seems so simple, doesn't it? Because you're right. You're saying, of course, we would want to do that. Like, are people not doing that? But the stats in that Gallup survey say that 70% of them are not.
Yeah.
Maybe they're being offered it, but maybe they're not being offered it in the right way, or they don't hear. Maybe it's not being communicated well enough.
It's definitely food for thought, isn't it? For if you're running a big business and or even any kind of size of business and you have employees, that should be headline.
You want to keep them, you want to keep them. You want to ensure that they're as good as possible, that they understand the technology that they need to, or whatever the area, that the sector, that they are at the forefront of whatever they're doing, because then you've got the best.
Yeah. And you're investing in yourself as you invest in them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't understand why that would be an issue. So all I can think of, well, cost, obviously, cost is always going to be a key component, but also maybe it's not being well communicated, because you might see on the other side of that poll, the companies are saying there's no take up. So we don't know that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
I wonder if there's suspicion around what is being offered.
Yeah. Or maybe they're not offering
the right thing.
According to a HubSpot stats, that businesses can increase their revenue by as much as 50% if they invest in not procedures, training and just things to do with how they develop their younger staff.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is probably around, it probably brings me to my next point, which was balancing tech native skills with human leadership. So that's kind of this age group is fluent in socials. We talked about that. Search and decision making is done on socials. So those skills can be really important, but they're also very fluent in AI and digital. But maybe they just need mentoring. Maybe it's the soft skills.
It is the soft skills, I think. And sadly, and I've weathered so many depressions in the economy in my life. I know that soft skills are always where they think...
You can't be a day over 30, David.
Especially with the haircut.
But that's where they always can't. I can't spend money on soft skills, because those decision makers can't see the connection between soft skill and money, income.
Interesting, because you would have thought in the service sector that was should be incredibly high on the agenda.
Yeah,
interesting.
I was interested in hearing what you had to say about AI and social media for fact checking and so on, because recently I was speaking to a 30-year-old, actually he's 32, and he was complaining that his father, who is in his late 50s, gets all his facts from Facebook, all his information.
Oh dear.
All his information from Facebook. So here's two different generations. It's the younger generation that's saying, why would you go to Facebook to get all your information? And yet I thought that most Gen Z does. So it's clear I'm wrong there.
Instagram and TikTok in particular.
YouTube.
And that's where my friend's news channel is huge on TikTok. It's even bigger on TikTok than Instagram. She's,
So the search, so the kind of search as a tool in general, whether for business or whether for education, etc. So still probably Google #1, but not far behind YouTube. And then obviously you've got TikTok. Reddit's massive. And that's actually a big opportunity for these businesses right now, especially when you factor in recruitment and that kind of LinkedIn's emphasizing you have to prove that you're a genuine employer, and we're going to put it out there front with their job tab update. But also Reddit, not many businesses have a Reddit strategy, but people are on there free to talk about lots of different subjects. It's a really difficult channel, but actually at the moment, 40% of what's pulled by AI into ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude and Grok and Gemini and all the others is Reddit.
And Reddit is out of date quite often. When you go onto some of the forums, if you're looking for something, you often find that the last response on something was like 4 or 5 years ago. So it's
and this is one of the things as well. And the other argument is, so the fact is that citations are coming from there. But I was having a chat with a guy who is in the AI world. So they work with like American universities who develop products, and then they work with the PE and the VC that take those products, or just individually backed companies that take those products and try and put them to market. So we're having this conversation about the marketing aspect and whether, and they were telling me that there's this thing called cubic feeding. So, the deal recently done with OpenAI and Oracle was about data, because the accuracy of data. And so AI doesn't have the accuracy of data. And so they're trying to address that. So there's billions of pounds going into partnership deals where they can get more accurate data to use with the AI. So that may change in the future, but currently 40% comes from there. So, but it's not maybe all factual, but that's the point, isn't it? At the end of the day, people search where they search right now, and that may change. But
that's interesting. Yeah.
So, and the final headline that I had, well, and I do find that AI thing really fascinating, because I think that's going to be in the next 6 months, in the years to come. It's going to be really key that you have people who understand new technology, and their brains are probably more wired. Like, I don't know about you, but my brain has taken a lot to kind of get up to speed, and maybe now I move a bit more quickly. But for a lot of people, they can't even get their heads around it. They don't even have the headspace for it, and it's challenging, stressful.
But does it stress Gen Z? Does it stress them, this digital revolution?
Not according to the research that my team could do.
Right.
In fact, they're well geared to bring things to a company that are going to be really important to that company in 5 or 10 years' time. So
what training would they need? What training, forget communication and confidence and so on, and management training. But in addition to those, which I think are important anyway, but in addition to those, what sort of training would they be offered or require in terms of AI?
Well, exactly. Those are the things to think about. And also, should we reframe the way that we look at them as kind of mini experts and a really valuable piece of getting ahead?
Indeed.
Possibly.
Or maybe it should be everyone should know.
Yeah, well, true. And then, so preparing tomorrow's leaders, I think we just answered that really, actually. How do we coach them? How do we mentor them? Is there anything else that we maybe haven't covered in this episode relevant to Gen Zs that we feel we could give value to the audience that are watching?
Well, we've talked about mental health, purpose, authenticity. Have we talked about flexibility? Yes, I think we have.
Flexibility, well-being, loyalty, the want to feel loyal. So I think that's a really good grounding for the episode. So David and Sandi, I really appreciate you joining me for episode 2.
Thank you.
And of course, you'll join me for episode 3, with the title yet to be decided, but on the same kind of subjects, things that our businesses who are watching can find really valuable. If you've enjoyed this show, then obviously subscribe, like and comment and support. And we'll be back for the next one that'll come out on the 1st of November. Any final words from my esteemed colleagues?
Well, it's been wide-ranging with lots of food for thought. I hope your viewers get as much from it as I have.
My final word would be, forget us and them. Everyone's a human being, and everyone has a hierarchy of needs, and communication is the answer.
Love that. And my final words would be that Sandi and David actually have a course or project that you do together that actually would be really valuable for businesses if you want help in terms of how you address that and how you improve that leadership side of things. Do you just want to end with that? What is that? And then I can put a link to your LinkedIn's at the end of the conversation or in the comments.
We have a series of courses that we offer our clients that are all about leadership and succession, and they are all customized for each client. So it's not one of these one size fits all. We actually come in and talk to the customer and find out what it is they want, what they need, what the issues are, and then help them to work around it.
But our promise really is in 3 months, we're going to transform your relationship with your Gen Z and Gen Z's relationship with you.
Love that.
And use that as a springboard to make the whole firm significantly more successful.
Fabulous. And to kind of highlight the value of that I think that brings me back to a conversation that you told me, David, that you had when you used to be an actor, then you became a theatre director, and then you saw things from a different view. And sometimes just being able to tell somebody to take a step forward and deliver the line allows them to be in the light. And it's very much the same, isn't it? Sometimes you can't see it if you're in it.
You definitely can't see it when you're in it. I know that from every client experience. I'm sure it's the same for Sandi. You can't see it when you're in it because you're too far in it. It's like being on the stage and seeing all the other players on the stage, but only from the angle that you are on the stage. So everything behind you is missing. You've got a blind spot. Well, as a director, I have no blind spot because I can see the whole stage, and I can say to you, take one step forward, take one step back, we can help people chart a journey for themselves and a journey for the firm.
And we're looking in from outside, so our perspective is very different. And I think sometimes we have more clarity, I think. So.
And according to HubSpot, the opportunity is 50% extra revenue. So I'd say that's value creation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
A pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.